Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I'm very pleased to have my old writing partner and partner in crime, well, not really crime, in business, Lamar Waldron, with us. Lamar is the author of numerous books on the John Kennedy assassination, on Richard Nixon. It is, and in my opinion, one of our nation's great historians. And Lamar, welcome back to the program.
Great to be with you, Thom.
Would you just refresh my memory and all of our listeners to your most recent book is The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination, or is your most recent book the Nixon book?
Actually, the most recent book is The Hidden History of the JFKassassination.com.
Okay.
Well, the title is The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination.
Right.
I also made the title of the website.
Right.
So that's probably the most important book, and that does have some of the important Nixon stuff in it that we will be talking about today.
Okay. So you know, let's start out. I want to get to James Comey and how the FBI has been helping Republicans for 60 years. But we've got an hour here to talk, so let's just get into the details. The parallels, you talk about the parallels between Donald Trump and Richard Nixon, and you know, actually, let me back up a little bit. You were warning about Donald back in June on this program. You were warning that Donald Trump could become president because Trump was using Nixon's proven playbook. Talk about that.
Sure. That was back on, I believe, June the 21st. You were nice enough to have me on the show. And at that time, Trump was at kind of a low point, you know, because he would go to high points and to low points. And he was, at that particular time, was widely regarded as a joke by the mainstream media, which had, you know, spent the last year building him up. He started as a joke. They let him and his surrogates spout all of their many lies and distortions, and they used Trump for ratings, frankly. And, you know, they built him up. But then I think, you know, buyer's remorse was setting in, and they were feeling a little guilty. So by the third week of June, he was kind of, you know, back to being a joke again. And I warned that he was using Nixon's proven playbook, which is called using fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear, which abbreviates to FIBS, and that was coined by a Republican senator back in 1950. And Nixon successfully used, you know, fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear to win his first race to Congress, to win his first race to the Senate, to help win 2 races as vice president, to win in 68, and then overwhelmingly in 72, even after, you know, Watergate had been widely reported. So oddly enough, the 2 elections where he didn't really go all in on fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear were in 1960, when he was instead relying on the mafia to help him beat JFK, and in 1962 when he ran for governor of California and made the famous quote at the end to the press, "You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore." So, but whenever he used fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear, he won. Trump was exactly doing that, you know, making people fear minorities.
Well, wasn't Trump advised by old Nixon hands?
Well, you know, starting with, probably the biggest one really was Roger Ailes, which we did not really fully realize that at the time. But Ailes was Nixon's master strategist who helped him, you know, come back and win in 68 after Nixon had lost in 60, lost in 62 because he had not used fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear. Ailes, you know, brought him back and made him the TV Teflon candidate, just like Donald Trump now is, you know, is not having press conferences and meeting openly with the press. He's having these, you know, like the off-the-record thing where he lambasted the network anchors and the big network executives yesterday. But so Ailes helped him there. Roger Stone, a big early Trump advisor, got his start helping Richard Nixon. Reportedly, still has a tattoo of Nixon, a huge one, on his back. So it's no accident that Trump, like a lot of Republicans, had learned to use those Nixon techniques over the years.
Yeah. So that's one parallel. You said that another parallel between Trump and the real Nixon was treason? That's pretty strong language.
Well, when you and I were talking back in June, we were talking about parallels. You brought up treason, And you know, I have to own up to all of it. Yeah, I did kind of predict Trump's victory back in June, but I did caution on the air that at that time, you know, I could see no provable treason that Trump had been committing. So, you know, you know, we kind of both agreed to kind of drop the treason because that really didn't seem to be one of the similarities. Of course, Nixon having committed treason at the very least in 1968 by illegally torpedoing the Paris peace talks to bring a ceasefire and an end to the Vietnam War before the 1968 election in November.
Right. Yeah, we have a clip of Nixon talking about that to Everett Dirksen that we play frequently on this program. So yeah.
Right. Well, I think you mean LBJ.
LBJ. Yeah. I'm sorry.
And they actually used the term treason, and so
Yeah.
you know that, and it was actually briefly documented in the Boston Globe a few months after it happened. But you know, once a guy becomes president, the press backs off a lot. So in June, I couldn't see any definite treason. Well, now that we know about the whole WikiLeaks thing, and even, you know, one of the people Trump is considering, I believe the National Security Agency director, you know, is saying that, you know, a foreign power did, you know, work with, you know, the Trump organization to try to influence the election. Yeah, I think you can now add treason into the mix as well. So,
Yikes.
you know, you've got the treason, you've got, you know, again, Trump just handling that news media like the TV veteran he is. I mean, we've talked about people like Roger Ailes, but, you know, people forget that Nixon, 7 months after the Watergate break-in had been widely reported, he had a 67% approval rate after he had been reelected overwhelmingly. Because people think today about the Washington Post, about maybe Walter Cronkite, Daniel Shore, whom you and I interviewed, Dan Rather, but they were the rare exception. Nixon used to openly brag, as we know now on his Watergate tapes, of the 10,000. And that was, you know, all of the media executives, writers, newspapers were big in those days. He could get out anything he wanted, just like Trump has the huge right-wing echo chamber that dominates, you know, in talk radio on the public airwaves, you know, something that Hillary Clinton, no matter how many ads she could buy, could never match. So, you know, so again, you've got the treason, you've got the media, you've even got the tax issue. People remember Richard Nixon saying, you know, I'm not a crook. He was not saying that about Watergate. He was saying that about his refusal to pay taxes like ordinary working people. He was talking to a bunch of news editors for the Associated Press down in Disney World, of all places, and it had come out that he had only paid like, you know, $700-something in taxes in 1970.
Right.
And $800-something in 71, and he makes this comment in November of 73, not about Watergate, but about his refusal to pay taxes. And also, you know, so again, we've got the other similarity to Trump. In fact, Nixon spent most of the 1960s.
Weird parallel. Hang on just a second here, Lamar.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Lamar Waldron with us for the hour, the political commentator, historian, author, The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination, and others. That's absolutely fascinating. I somehow I had thought that Nixon's "I am not a crook" had to do with Watergate. I guess that's the popular assumption that everybody has.
Well, the problem is Nixon, as we know now, committed so many crimes, dozens of felonies, and over 40 of his members of his administration were either convicted or indicted, that, you know, people forget. But yeah, he got all these corporate bribes. He got money from foreign governments. We have no idea what Donald Trump's foreign entanglements are. Both Nixon and Trump do not have a blind trust, which is typical for almost all other presidents. I mean, and you get right down to it.
Well, Nixon's being applauded in the press right now for having taken all his money out of his investments and having bought 2 houses with that money, and therefore taking them from being, you know, active investment to completely passive investment, like he was some sort of saint. Are they getting something wrong? I've heard that like 3 or 4 times now on both CNN and MSNBC.
Are you talking about Richard Nixon at this point?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so the big scam there is, of course, Nixon Nixon wasn't the dour, sour man that we see, that he was near the, shortly before he resigned, that he's depicted in movies. Far from it. He was like I wouldn't call him gregarious, but he was a very personal guy. It was John Kennedy who was the shy one who had to kind of force himself. Nixon loved to be with people. There's a great phony press event with people here in Georgia that people can watch on YouTube that Roger Ailes set up where he got softball questions. Nixon's like a game show host almost. He's great. But the other thing about Nixon is, too, so he loved to pretend to be the average, the friend of the working man. He loved money. He loved the tropics. He loved associating with the wealthy. He wanted to be wealthy because he had spent so much time helping in the 60s as a private attorney, helping the wealthy avoid taxes, including and helping people launder money. His best friend was named Bibi Rebozo. So Nixon had two private White Houses, not just Camp David. He had one in Key Biscayne, the nicest part of Miami. He had the other one out in California, in San Clemente, one of the most beautiful pieces of property in all of California, on this mission-style house, mansion overlooking, on this cliff, overlooking a beautiful private beach. I mean, it's just great. But Bibi Rebozo was mobbed up from the word go, as was Nixon. And so basically Bibi Rebozo's job was to officially and unofficially make the money for Nixon while Nixon was president. And then after Nixon's presidency, Nixon would get the money that had been stashed in the Bahamas or Rebozo's private little Miami bank or in Swiss bank accounts. And so let's look at Key Biscayne. Richard Nixon didn't live there with his family like we all thought and we would see in Life magazine at the time. His wife and kids had their own house. Nixon had his own house. And in the White House official compound in Key Biscayne, Bibi Rebozo, this mob guy, had a house in the compound. So Nixon and Rebozo were just thick as thieves, which is what they were. So
Nixon did not live with his wife?
Well, when he was in Key Biscayne, his wife and kids had their own house. Nixon had his own house.
Why?
Well, because, when Nixon is dealing with someone like Bibi Rebozo, you have to remember, even those Nixon tapes in the Oval Office, Nixon always knew when he was being recorded. He could control that.
Right. So this was the place where he could hang out with the mobsters, and he didn't want his wife to. That's amazing. Lamar, hang on just a second. We'll be right back. Welcome back. 20 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Lamar Waldron on the line with us, one of America's great, in my opinion, one of America's great historians. And Lamar, in addition to your book about the JFK, the hidden history of the JFK assassination, you wrote a book about Watergate. Refresh my memory on the title, please.
It is, and excuse me if I look so I get it exactly right, Watergate, the hidden history, Nixon, the mafia, and the CIA.
Okay, so we were just starting to wander into Bibi Rebozo territory here. This was the way that, Nixon, all the press is now talking about, they're talking about blind trusts and things. And Nixon, supposedly, his blind trust was that he took all his money and he put it into a house in Key Biscayne and a house in California. And therefore, he had no conflicts of interest.
Right.
But you're saying
lots of shady aspects to both of those deals. And again, Nixon was just getting gobs of money from like the Milk Producers Association, all of these
were
big
bribes.
Executives.
You're talking bribes.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically bribes, and we know about some of them. Others, we know money was given. We don't know where it went. Well, now we know it went to Bibi Rebozo for Richard Nixon. Let's dial it all the way back, as I did in the Nixon book. Let's go back to the start on Trump and Nixon, and you'll see, because you got to watch. Sometimes you have to go back a generation.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at Trump. So, Mitt Romney called Trump a con man. And other people have documented Trump's alleged ties to organized crime. But let's go back farther than that. So, because Nixon and Trump both make perfect sense if you look at them like sleazy con men. Let's go back to Trump's draft-dodging grandfather, dodged the draft in Germany, whose brothels were the start of the Trump family fortune. I swear to God, brothels in Alaska,
Right.
and which puts Trump's
When the gold rush started, yeah.
And let's put that puts Trump's sexual assault and his exploitation of young women, being his sleazy modeling agency and his beauty pageants, in a whole new light. In other words, that runs in the family, and then we go on up to things like Roy Cohn, who was big with McCarthy, and it was literally Trump's mentor in New York City. And Roy Cohn, was thick as thieves with Nixon back in the 50s, when it really wasn't the McCarthy era, because he only lasted part of it. It was the Nixon-McCarthy era.
So a quick question, Lamar. I spent much of the first hour of this program today reading from Milton Mayer's "They Thought They Were Free" about the rise of fascism in Germany, and implicitly drawing parallels to today. And, with Richard Spencer coming here to Washington, D.C. and doing his whole,
oh, yeah,
Sieg Heil, Heil Trump, all that kind of stuff. And if you're conflating Trump and Nixon, I mean, if all we're seeing here is a repeat of the Nixon presidency, we survived that okay. I mean, it wasn't the greatest time, and he lied to us about a lot of things, and he extended the Vietnam War, as you say, committing treason, blowing up the peace negotiations in '68, extended the Vietnam War to '73. But we made it through, whereas Germany didn't make it through in the '30s when they elected their authoritarian leader. Are you suggesting that Trump is just, sort of like Nixon, or do you think he's a whole different kind of cat?
Well, I have to give you credit. You're the person that told me the definition of fascism, the way it used to be in the dictionary until some other company bought it and sort of changed it. But, I mean, Nixon was definitely taking...
that fascism is the merger of corporate and state interests.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And so Nixon, the one reason we didn't turn into Nazi Germany was because, remember, Nixon did not get to finish his second term. And later on, we'll talk about exactly why that was and how progressives can help apply that to Donald Trump, not on the second term, but hopefully on the first. So that is, I think, the biggest difference. I mean, Nixon, people talk about a divided country now. Again, look at that 67% approval rating. The people that didn't approve of Nixon, knew he was a crook. They weren't willing to forgive all of his crimes just because he pandered to their racism or their fears that he was stoking. So I have to say that's kind of the big difference between America under Nixon and Nazi Germany. I mean, if Hitler had been deposed in 36 or 37, or even 38 or 39, as there were, talks about maybe trying to do that among the military,
sure.
We never would have had World War II. And even though we survived Nixon, remember, so 20,000 men and women in Vietnam died. God knows, probably 100,000 people in North and South Vietnam died. The whole trend, you and I remember when regular working people had it really good in this country, especially
at least white working people.
Yeah, let's face it. If you were white, but even black working people were doing a lot better than they had been doing in the 50s. But that all started to change. The whole union membership, that all changed under Nixon. So Nixon has had far-reaching influence beyond his term. And again, he and Trump both are just sleazy conmen. I was shocked when I went back to learn where Nixon came from. I mean, his first mob contact was when he was an older teenager, when he was a carnival barker for a crooked sideshow game in Prescott, Arizona, and he was trained. He was very good at it, how to flee. And think about this. This is Trump in a nutshell, and Nixon. He learned how to fleece the rubes, and that's how he saw them, but with a smile, so that they liked being fleeced, and they'll come back so you can fleece them again. Nixon learned that so well that he earned so much money playing poker in the Navy from his buddies who all loved him, even when he would take them, that he was able to use that money and some mob money to then run for Congress. And again, Trump's the same. Look how many of his supporters need the programs he's going to cut or dismantle. And again, with Nixon, if we go earlier than his presidential term back to the 1960 race, his mob ties that were huge with people like Mickey Cohen, the head of the Los Angeles Mafia, Carlos Marcello, the head of the Mafia in Louisiana and Texas, and especially Santo Trafficante, the godfather of Tampa.
And the guys who killed Kennedy, by the way.
I was going to say,
but
those organized crime ties that Nixon used for his political gain, attempted to, in 1960 did lead to the event, we're celebrating the tragic anniversary of today, which was JFK's murder.
Right. So we have just a minute until we're going to hit a break. We're going to, hold on to you after the break. But is there any evidence of organized crime connections in Donald Trump's life?
Well, again, places like Politico, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and I have to say it because I don't always agree with Washington Post. Thank God for the Washington Post, right now, and that they've got a guy with deep pockets like Jeff Bezos owning it, because, again, they're willing to write about, and report on these alleged. At
least for the moment. I mean, but Nick, Trump's Justice Department could make life miserable for Amazon. Or the Commerce Department, rather, could go after them for antitrust violations.
I worry strongly about exactly that. But yeah, all of those outlets, I believe especially Politico's done a really, really good job, but I don't want to oversight, the New Yorker. I don't want to, overlook the New York Times, Washington Post. But, the crimes both to domestic, mafia organized crime, as you might expect for someone who was in the building trades a lot and who admits his mentor was Roy Cohn, New York's biggest mob lawyer in many ways.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We're going to pick this conversation up on the other side of the news here at the bottom of the hour. Stick around. Lamar Waldron is with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
He's the author of Watergate, the hidden history of the JFK assassination, and he and I wrote a couple of other books together. So we'll be right back.